Welcome everyone to Flatiron School. It's really amazing to see all of you here. We're super excited about tonight's panel. So without further ado, I'll just introduce our moderator and our panelists. We have moderating tonight Becky Case from Birchbox. We have Yvette Pasqua from Meetup, Molly Williams from Werk, and Alix Keller from Speakable. I'm going to let them tell you a little bit more about their background and how they came to coding. So we'll get started. I did just want to mention, if you've never heard of Flatiron School before, feel free to grab a flyer. We have some floating around. And also some of you may know that last week we announced a really exciting partnership with Birchbox. We're offering over $100,000 in scholarships to Flatiron School to women. It's called Women Take Tech. So if you want more information, just go to womentaketech.com. So without further ado, our panel.
Hi, can you guys hear me? Good. Great. So I'm Becky. I am the Director of Engineering for Core Platform and International at Birchbox. Really quickly, I got my start kind of in college. I went to school on a vocal performance scholarship. And halfway through my freshman year, I just decided I didn't want to wait tables for the rest of my life. So I just randomly took a comp sci class and fell in love with it. And I've been programming ever since. Do you want to go?
Sure. Hey, I'm Yvette. I started coding in college too, but not with a comp sci degree or not through a comp sci class. I was a biology, neuropsychology major freshman year. The guy across the hall from me happened to be my RA, and we would hang out and he'd teach me Unix shell commands, and I learned some HTML and started building websites back then. I then got a part-time job installing networking hardware and software at the med school. I wanted to be a doctor back then, so figured, oh, cool, I know this computer stuff. It'll get me an in to figuring out what it's like to be a doctor. Back then, I was debugging COM ports and dial-up modem stuff. And when I graduated from college, so I did that part-time job for a year. I did another part-time job as a webmaster. I got fired. That was the first time I ever got fired from a gig. I learned quickly that when the client asks you to put a counter in the bottom left corner of their site, even if you think it's silly and dorky and not a good idea, you just do it. So I worked in client services for 10 years after that and never made that mistake again. When I graduated, I realized I loved coding and software more than I loved going to school for medicine, and did that ever since.
I'm Molly. I have to admit, I'm not a coder. Well, I guess a little bit of SQL and HTML, but by trade, I'm not an engineer. I went to business school, and then I went into consulting, and I really like working on businesses and growing businesses and solving business problems. And somewhere along the road in consulting, I started working with clients who were using technology to solve problems and create a lot of value for their businesses, and I thought that was really cool, and I wanted to do more of that. So I moved into software consulting, and working with project teams, started to learn a lot more about engineering and software development, and migrated over into product and operations, and have been in this startup space. I don't love that term, but I'll use it. Been in this startup space for a couple of years now, and I'm now at Werk as the head of product and operations.
Hi, I'm Alix. I started programming when I was about 15 because I was a hardship case, and I took care of my mom and my family, and started programming as a DBA, so as a database administrator for SAP, and did some work there, and that followed me on my resume forever and ever because there's not a lot of SAP people anymore, that I still get phone calls about it. And I went and started my first startup when I was about 17, started with a group of people, and really was doing more engineering operations, like product management, that sort of deal, to really shift gears from being a DBA to maybe running process and business, and then said, all right, maybe I should become a molecular biologist. So then I went to school for that for a while, and did molecular biology for about 5 years, hence all the science tattoos on me. And then went back to technology when I realized I was far too gregarious for the lab bench, but took on more like management, business development, and software roles. Being that I did have the tech background, I knew how to do a lot of testing, and I had that scientific mindset to, well, if only there was a way to test my hypothesis. And then so I just applied that to the laws of product development. So that's the story.
Yeah. So one thing that I've noticed is that all of you guys are leaders in tech. What led you to decide to become a manager? How did you get there? And why don't you start first, Alex?
So I think it was bestowed upon me by the universe because I'm really loud and I was a middle child and I wanted to be heard, I think. So I was going to figure out how to get in those roles, you know, if it was going to kill me. So I think it wasn't a cognitive decision as much as it was just going to happen that way. Like I said, I was far too gregarious for the lab bench. I wanted to work with people. I wanted to coach people. I wanted to hire people better than me. And I wanted to be a mentor someday because I had mentors and those types of skills. To be a leader in tech was for me about being a generalist and doing everything once. I've launched over 100 pieces of software, so I can say, yeah, I've basically seen it all, and it all starts to sound the same. And then you can apply, you know, this formula of how to run these businesses and how to lead the teams that seems to work across all of these disciplines. And it became natural to me to want to lead in those areas due to the fact that I really had spent, 17 years in them, so.
I don't think I ever had a cognitive decision either about becoming a leader, although my parents would probably say they knew it from very early on. I think for me, it came naturally out of the work that I gravitated towards. I've never been a terribly long-term planner. My career trajectory has been about continuing to find new things that challenge me and interest me and pursue them so that I'm continually stimulated and learning. And naturally, as a product of the work that I was doing, completing that work began to involve bringing on new team members and taking responsibility for them. It wasn't, I didn't work for a large company that had a formal management training program. It was all of a sudden I was being given more responsibilities that I couldn't do all myself in 24 hours of one day. It required learning how to work with other people and manage the work and manage them and do those things simultaneously.
Yeah, so I think similarly, it was never something that I said, you know what, I'm going to be a manager next year. I was a software engineer for about 7 years before I really started doing management. I had gotten a taste of it as a technical project manager for a year, which I loved doing. I ended up taking a job where I was the third person hired in a new office that a digital agency internet startup was opening. And initially I was going to be the lead engineer and try to hire people and figure it out, right? I typically worked for very young startup type companies earlier in my career. What I loved about that is that you get to do a lot of different things, right? You get exposed to a really broad area of things. I ended up being the operations person for a while at that office with zero experience and just trying to figure things out on my own, but I learned so much so fast doing that. So being the third person hired, I started hiring other people. Our business grew, and I realized, wow, I really love this hiring of people thing. I really love managing them. And you know what? To be perfectly honest, I was never the best engineer in the room anyway. And I think I'm better at this manager leader type stuff and setting other engineers up to all be the best engineer in the room rather than me. So let me keep doing this. And I really loved it.
Yeah. So my next question, I guess, would be, as you shift from being an individual contributor, your work becomes less about what you can deliver and more about what your team can deliver. And a lot of engineers have that kind of issue with trying to come to terms with, I didn't spend my day coding, and what do I have to show for it? I spent all day in meetings. How do you deal with that, and what are your career goals now defined by? Yeah, go for it.
Sure. So honestly, I've coached a lot of engineers with those questions, and if they have those questions for more than a few months, they should probably go back and be an individual contributor, and that's great, right? So I'm a huge believer in any company needs as senior, as awesome, as lucrative, as will pay you the money type career growth path for individual contributors. I prefer to call those kind of people makers because I feel like they're still team contributors even though they're writing code and maybe leading teams technically all the time as managers. So I really feel like those two things are equal from a leadership perspective, should be equal from a pay grade perspective, should be equal from a visibility perspective and flexibility perspective. And I think you can tell quite quickly when you start doing the manager stuff, if you love helping teams and listening to problems and solving not technical engineering problems as much as human and organizational and people and process and tooling problems, which I would argue might be even harder than writing some code. And I think people can tell pretty quickly. I think often people get pushed into management roles because they feel or their company feels like that's the only way for them to become leaders. And I really feel like that's pretty toxic for careers and for companies. And being a new manager is hard, and I think you should have a great mentor and a coach who's in there with you, helping you. But if you're, I really strongly feel like if you're fighting against that for more than 3 or 6 months, you probably know what your calling is, and you should go back to it and do it.
And Molly, how has your career goals changed now that you're a manager?
I don't know.
Nice.
I think again, I'm probably not as good at thinking long term as I should, but when I consider the framing that I use in approaching a project, a new hire, a new strategy or phase of growth for whatever I'm working on, whatever company I'm engaged with, as a manager, that mindset has to include the other people. And the goals have to shift from being what can I produce to how can I chart the growth for those individuals. It's a different set of activities. And when I think about what my own personal objectives are, I've seen a shift in that list of objectives, including tasks and skills, to now also including managerial skills, developing performance plans. How can I help other people grow in new ways? And also making sure that I continually feel comfortable enough to connect the value that comes out of growing and managing other people to the business and to the bottom line. There's always that sense of larger context. Why are we doing this? What is our objective? How does helping someone help the business and move the needle forward in a larger sense so that everyone feels positive about that investment in time and effort?
Same question?
Sure.
So being a kind of an ex-engineer, having coded enough, and I think the managerial component here for me was I okay with just being making sure everybody was BS compliant, and which was just determining the instances when I was speaking with engineering firms or talking to the sales guy for some enterprise solution we were going to be investing in our stack or in our IT solutions. Was I wait, exactly, what do you mean there? And how would we exactly integrate? And is that really possible? So I was in the rooms in those meetings for those reasons, right? Just to hold people accountable. And that there was somebody in the room. And maybe it helped I was a woman because I didn't know that I was actually the boss. And the questions were being directed to the dudes in the room that worked for me. that were like, to like quit looking at me, like look at her, like, oh my God, you're gonna get us in trouble. And so, you know, I was there to kind of just make sure everybody was on the up and up, and any manager having problems from the tech space, you know, sitting in those meetings and stuff, and, you know, of course, I'd tell them to go back to programming if that's not what they want to do, but they have such an important role to the organization to field, you know, the concerns and to be forward-thinking and technical enough to know architecturally in this room what y'all are saying will not work or doesn't make any sense or will take us 20 times longer to do it that way. We could always just fix the people problem maybe and then solve a people problem with a technical problem, like all those types of things that come up, right? So I think it's having the balance of using technology to solve people problems versus just working with the people and fixing things head on.
So you guys mentioned mentors a lot and like mentoring your direct reports and helping them grow career-wise. Any of you have mentors yourselves?
I did. I mean, I would take them with me forever and ever, but I move around a lot for work. You know, one of my first mentors when I graduated high school, I was 16. And I mean, she was like this severe, badass paratrooper woman that had jumped out of a plane a gazillion times and then decided to be the CEO of this tech company. And I remember meeting her. Like I was going to start working for her. I didn't know it at the time. And I'm just like chatting her up. She's the CEO of my friend's company. And I'm just like talking to her about all, you know, what I was doing in Texas. I'm sitting here in Austin. And she's like, I like you. You remind me of myself. Do you want to come work for me? And I was like, I got to graduate high school in a couple of weeks. I will be back. And that's exactly how that happened. And she became my mentor in essence. And I remember when I quit the job, like she was like, I mean, the most gracious, like I had to eventually quit and move on, right? I mean, I got a better gig. Okay, let's just put it that way. They wanted to pay me more money. I was like, yes, I'm 18 now. I can make all this money. This is so great. The dot-com tech boom in 2000, it was fantastic. So she was so gracious, like when I made that transition, that I'll never forget that when I lose team members. And yeah, I'm mentoring them along the way, but the hardest point is when your baby birds leave you. And I think that's important. And then in keeping up with them, getting mentors, there's also getting the connections. That you get, not only their knowledge, but the connections and staying in touch and knowing people that have really been through it and leaning on them when you have, questions of your management style. And then I had another executive coach that was hired in by my company, and I really leveraged that person to moderate my developing skills as really a people manager and not just a product manager or a project manager. It was like people managing. People had problems and they really came first, you know, over my deliverables and my builds. They came first and I had to help them along the way and developing what those skills look like and make sure the business goals are met when people are actually first. So
I don't know that I've ever been super comfortable with the word mentor, but I definitely have had them and been referred to as one. It just feels a little too formal for me. My strategy has always been to identify really special people and relationships that I intersect with at different points in my life. And not in any spiritual way, I just have always found the timing to be really appropriate. The fact that we are intersecting at a company, at a project, at a location means there is some sort of shared base that we have in common, and we connect over a project, over, you know, the employment relationship, and maintaining those relationships even beyond the scope of that initial engagement gives such interesting perspective to me to be able to go back and check in with one of the first mentors that I ever had in my first job out of college, who was so appropriate to be giving me guidance at that time when I was 22 and didn't have experience, and this person knew so much more than I did. To sit down and update that person on what I'm doing now and hear their perspective is so different and eye-opening than having the same conversation with someone who just came into my life in the more recent years. And similarly, I've found with the handful of people who have used the mentor word to describe the relationship that they have with me, it's a similar approach. They have, come and been an intern or been an employee of mine, and at that time in their life, I am uniquely positioned to provide them with a lot of help and advice and perspective, and that continues beyond that period of initiation.
So I guess in the past, I've certainly had some great mentors. I read an article once that talked about the difference between a mentor and a sponsor, and I really liked the difference. I think the writer was talking about a mentor is a little bit passive. What you really want is a sponsor who's going to take action and be active in your career. And I feel like I had a couple of really awesome sponsors in my career who did things like promote me before I thought I was ready, who gave me some really tough, straight up feedback. But I grew quickly from failures and from failing fast and learning fast. Relocated me, gave me bigger and bigger jobs that I had never done before. And looking back, I had a couple of really amazing sponsors in my career. Both happened to be dudes. And I also think that, they either knowingly or unknowingly, and I've talked with some of them since, so maybe a little bit knowingly, they equalized access to roles that many women in tech didn't have, and they were somewhat consciously doing that. A lot of guys get handed roles before they're ready, and if you read a lot about this, they say fewer women do, and fewer women ask for those roles. I didn't have the presence of mind younger to ask for those things, but I got a couple of great opportunities handed to me, probably before conventional wisdom would say I was ready, and I worked really hard, and I did the best I could, and I grew from there. As far as being a sponsor or mentor now, or having one now, you're all gonna laugh, but I go to a lot of meetups, I go to a lot of clubs. And I tend to end up in mentoring situations for very specific things, right? So I met the former CTO of Twitter, and he had some really great advice about a particular topic, so I brought him in to speak with me and my team, and I learned so much from his talk. Camille, who used to be the CTO of Rent the Runway, I saw her speak once and found one of her talks fascinating and had her come in, and I learned a ton, and we've kept in touch since. And I try to make myself available for all of those types of things, so it's more of a peer type networking thing at this point for me. And from me being a mentor perspective, I've taken a pretty big stance, which is somewhat controversial and maybe potentially illegal, but I'll pretty much answer any woman or underrepresented person's email, right? So that means a person of color, some other underrepresented group, any woman. I will take any coffee with those people. I need to expand my network. I need to equalize access to tech to those folks. And I'll pretty much say no to anybody else. So that's how I roll these days, and it's actually quite awesome to meet new people.
How can you tell via an email?
You can do some homework.
Great.
People have pictures. Yeah,
Awesome.
on that internet thing.
So that's great. So that's one way, I guess, to get a mentor. Do you guys have any advice for female engineers or females in tech looking for mentors? Like how best to go about it if they don't have one now?
That's a great question. You could all email me, and I'll have to email you back.
Yeah, go for it.
Yvette at meetup.com. You're gonna find it anyway, so I may as well give it to you. But I think that I would say the best thing to do is honestly try to find one as close to your actual job as possible. I grew so much more, and or find someone who you really want a job from, as much as possible, and try to make that happen. Because while having a mentor outside of work is great, because you can really like vent to them and you can get an outside perspective, it's pretty busy, right? You might do a coffee every couple of weeks, and you're not going to get the maybe 10 hours a week that you would get from your actual manager or your actual mentor at work. And what I'd say to anybody looking to switch jobs or looking for a new job, pick a job based on who's going to be your manager and who's going to be your mentor more than anything. Like, brands are great, and projects that they're going to pretend they're going to know which ones you're going to work on are great. The cool tech stack that's not going to be cool in 2 years might be great too, but what I think is going to accelerate most people, especially at the beginning of your career, is who's going to be looking out for me, who's going to be managing me, who's going to be mentoring me. If you don't meet that people during the interview, you probably know that that's not the right situation for you, right? Like, you always want to meet that person, and I just feel like the closer that person could be to your actual career, the more that you'll get out of it. That's how I felt, for me at least.
I really like your answer. I think I would say even one step beyond, I have found that all of the mentor-y relationships in my life have come out of workplaces, out of having that shared experience, that understanding. It's just a foundation that you don't need to work at, that you can take for granted and build off of, which really lets the focus remain on you and your development and the benefit that you'll get out of that relationship. So you don't have to put as much energy into explaining the business model or the technology or the problem du jour to that person who's not already clued in.
I like the answer. I mean, I have friends that are just such great, like, I have this friend, she's such a UX rock star that people take jobs that they hate sometimes, because she works in finance, right? And nobody wants to work in finance. But it pays people.
Sorry if you do.
It pays. No, I mean, like, for UX, yeah. It's just like, there's some other cooler things or whatever. And so, like, no one wants to do it. And they'll go and just work with her. And I thought that was like such a testament to how awesome of a UX person she was. Because they were like, these specific people do not want to work in finance, is my point. So they're like, oh yeah, no, I didn't want to do that, like, at all, no way. I wanted to work with you. I want to learn your process. I've seen this beautiful stuff you make out of like things that aren't as exciting, maybe. And you just make it like Minority Report level awesome. And then so they seek her out and they find her on LinkedIn and they're like, I want to work with her, and they apply for the companies, and then they get in there and the interview, and they're like, I'm here because I know exactly who you are. So I mean, it's a little sneaky, and maybe creep the person out a little bit, but if they're hiring, they'll be so flattered, they might just take you on because like you want to work specifically for them, and then they'll take you everywhere after that if you're really kick butt at your job. Yeah.
So speaking of hiring, what do you think some mistakes are that female engineers make?
We don't make any mistakes.
Sweet. I am on board with this.
No, I mean, I think there was definitely a period, like, I'm a mom now, okay? I think before I was a mom, I had a total chip on my shoulder about the fact I was female, and then I was young, okay? And so I was like I was kind of my own problem, right? And I made mistakes in that way of like assuming the absolute worst, like, what, you don't think I can do this? Well, I've been doing this for 10 years, okay? I know I might be X age on this application I had to fill out, but I've been doing this so long, all right? So everybody just back off. I really did have a chip on my shoulder a little bit, just a little. And the fact that I was a woman, I've grown out of that so much. I mean, just by growing up and then really just removing myself from situations that was actually true, right? Like, it actually was true. There was some bias against me or whatever. But also in the situations where I gravitated towards environments where I was going to be nurtured and it was going to be equalized, I could see by the fact that they brought me in, they weren't surprised that the Alix that walked in the door was actually not a dude. I mean, my name helped me a lot, honestly. And then I'm like, no, I saw what you listed the salary as, and that's what I'm gonna take, okay? The high one, not the low one. That kind of stuff.
Excuse me. I have to admit, I don't know that I've seen a lot of mistakes that are particular to female engineers. I would classify them as mistakes that are a trend among females and mistakes that are a trend among engineers, not discriminated by gender. Similar to what Yvette mentioned before, I think that it's not uncommon to see females not really reaching for a role that is a little bit beyond their experience, but they're very much qualified to grow into. And regardless of the industry or discipline, not articulating their own accomplishments in a way that sells that story and potential while they're interviewing is a mistake that I see females make more than men. On the engineer side, I only interview engineers as a culture fit. I'm obviously not testing their skills. So I would actually say dress code. And I know it's really superficial, but having worked in a lot of different companies, I've seen men and women be equally offensive, whether it be slippers on a male or a crop top on a female. It's just not what I want to see when I'm interviewing you. I'll be honest about it.
Do you think women should dress down when they go in?
I think everyone should dress to impress the person they're interviewing when they go in. And I think that burden is yours to figure out based on the evaluation and what you're trying to project. And that has nothing to do with your gender or the company that you're applying to or the job that you want. That is about you and what you're trying to accomplish, and you have to do that evaluation.
And that's you know what? Ask. My big advice to anyone interviewing, especially when you don't know much about the company or you're just getting going or you're just starting out, you could tell a great company and a great recruiter really quickly if you start asking them a lot of just straight up normal human questions like, hey, what would be the best thing for me to wear for my job interview? No one's going to think badly of that. They're going to be like, shit, why don't more people ask us those normal questions and not show up in like a suit or a crop top, right? So I don't think women don't ask more than men, but I think in general, like, ask and really use your recruiter as someone who should be an ally for you and should be helping you get that job. They want everyone to get that job as much as you do, right? Like, they're incented by the same things, especially if the incents are right. But I feel really similarly. I don't think there are things that female engineers are doing any differently than men from a technical perspective. Engineers are engineers. But I do think very similar to what you said, so I'm just stealing your answer. Women sometimes undersell themselves in the interview process a little bit. I think especially so because of the lack of women in computer science degrees the last few years. I think fewer women are graduating with a degree and more women are going to things like Flatiron or doing a career change. And I think there's so much that women in that position have to offer as engineers that isn't technical, right? One of the biggest things, I think any company is looking for, especially with young engineers, are, can you work on a team? Can you communicate well? Do you have, can you make those judgment calls where you know when to ask the question and when to research yourself, right? Can you make the judgment calls about how best to communicate something to a team member when, you might not be super happy with what they did, or they might not be super happy with what you did, and being able to resolve those things and having any kind of professional experience, whether it's, I sold sneakers and clothes before I got my part-time job as a computer person, right? Whether it's retail or service industry, you learn so much about working with people and working with teams. And I would talk about those things and sell them and really turn them into, well, how can I use those to solve this company's business problem, and really evangelize yourself.
So that's really awesome. And do you have any other recommendation for people who go from boot camp graduations as opposed to like a traditional computer science degree?
So I didn't have a traditional computer science degree. I do think, back in the 2000 booms, you could pretty much just get a job if you could write code. And I got the first job I could and, studied every night and wrote code on the weekends and figured it out, right? I'm not telling you to do that, by the way. You're already doing that if you're going to Flatiron, probably. But I would say, in addition to really positioning yourself as a professional, changing careers and looking at the value you bring holistically to a company and selling that and figuring out, like, how do I help solve those business problems in a way that I can do better than someone who's right out of college? I would also really think about, how can I get as much hands-on experience working with a handful of engineers on a project, right? You could, again, this isn't a sell, but we hear time and time and time again, going to meetups and doing kind of group coding sessions and learning from people, joining open source groups. I think really, like, the more skills you can get, doing your own projects is totally great, and you should do them as much as you can. But the more that you can work with at least a few other people on a team, the more you learn all of the things that are really important when you're working with other humans and making software, like documentation and testing and modular code and reusability and breaking down things into as small components as you can. Like, all of those things become more and more important when you're working with more people. So try to figure out a way to either meet people to do stuff with, join open source teams, but like be part of a team or a community, and that's what it's like working. And if you get some more experience doing that, I think you'll be able to really like make that jump even more.
So Alix, you mentioned having a lower salary versus a higher salary when you were talking about whether or not like people thought that you were a guy. A lot of women come in and they accept a lower salary, or they take like a gig that's lower than what they could be at. What is your advice to those women about like clawing back and like making up?
No, just don't do it. I think you evaluating your self-worth is pretty important, and sticking to it. I mean, there'll be these like times where you're like, all right, my contract's ending. I'm not gonna have that job for a while. I'm not saying everybody has a means to do this. Save your ducats if you have to make sure you can do this, because the payoff will be much greater. Like, literally save money so you can continue to ask for what you're worth. Like, if your contract's gonna end, or you're gonna be changing companies, or they're gonna shut down, or whatever the case may be, like, do not take the lower paying job, because now you have set yourself back. I mean, there's all these hat tricks that you can do in general anyway, right? You can switch jobs, there's startups, you can go for communicating worth beyond just a salary, work-life balance. You got to take all of those things into consideration. I've been pretty hard-headed about the years I've been in this industry, what my worth is, and kind of going back to the original question of what do you do after boot camp? How do you make yourself valuable when you didn't go through a traditional computer science degree? And there might be that HR person that isn't a tech person that might not even understand that I don't really want a guy that got a computer science degree necessarily. I just want somebody that might have spent 5 years coding at least, if I'm looking for a more senior role, right? I don't care where you went, what you did. What have you made in 5 years is the most important thing to me. And then from there, just evaluating your self-worth. And are you a niche person? Are you a strategic hire? And that's kind of like that key moment when I was like, I'm a strategic hire. That is totally different than, I'm a specialist. You're getting the fact that there's 17 years of mistakes I've made that you don't have to make. If by hiring me. And then once you get to that point, and when you're a recent graduate and you're like, so I was in this industry for 10 years and decided to program. I have a niche and I'm at the intersection here because I probably did something else before I came to Flatiron or a code academy of some sort. And I'm like really, truly a specialist in this business vertical, along with being able to write code in it now. So I think that's kind of where you wrap it up and buy yourself maybe the years or the degree that they're looking at and sell yourself as a strategic hire in that way.
Cool. So Molly, this is going to be our last question before we open it up to the group. Do you have any advice for your 20-year-old self, like looking back?
She's only 20 right now.
Yeah. That's right. I'm sorry. 18-year-old self? Yeah.
On any topic?
Career topic. But if you want to explore and like add more, that'd be fine as well.
No, we'll start with careers. We can address other things in the Q&A. I think starting from the beginning, being really thoughtful about my own value equation at every single job. Alix just talked about knowing your self-worth when you go into a negotiation. I have always approached any job, interview process, negotiation, life change as kind of like an equation. A key piece of that is understanding what my value is and what I bring to the table. There are so many other key pieces that by understanding and being a little bit, rote about lining them up, understanding what they are and how those fit together helps me comfortably and easily make decisions about what the right next steps are and remove some of the doubt and emotion from that. If I find myself at a place where I have identified this amazing UX leader who I just believe is going to help me revolutionize my career and my future, that is something that can be so valuable to me that as I consider the negotiation, I may be willing to relocate, or I may be willing to take a little bit less money than I think I'm personally worth because I'm getting so much value from another way. And so kind of approaching everything in a very big picture, multifaceted value equation would have been advice I would have liked to have known a little bit earlier.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we're going to open it up to the floor. If anyone has any questions, feel free. Yes, back there.
My question is, there are a lot of questions asked you during your tech interview. What is the best way to answer a question you don't know the answer to? So her question was, you're asked a lot of questions during your tech interview. If you don't know an answer, what's the best thing to say? So I think be honest, right? You can say, I don't really know the answer, but then if you can do this, ask questions that help you get to the answer, right? So if someone's asking you about how to paginate through a website or something and you've never done that before, maybe you want to ask them a question. Well, I've never done that before, but is it sort of like this other thing I've done before, and can I talk you through what I've done there? Or, whatever it is, I think what the person's really after, a good interviewer, is after understanding how you think and wanting you to explain something hard or not even that hard to them. So, the first thing is don't panic, take a few deep breaths, let them know you don't know the exact answer, and try to figure out, what questions can I ask to get somewhere where I can talk about something that I know.
So I feel underqualified to answer this question, but I will offer you this. I worked at a company where the CTO shared with me right after I joined that his hiring strategy, his priorities when he hired engineers was number 1, problem-solving abilities, number 2, cultural fit, and number 3, technical abilities, in that order. And that shocked me. I was like, well, this seems so out of sorts, but as I spent more and more time working with engineers, I realized that those were mirrored in some of the best engineers that I worked with. And so kind of bringing that back to when I was in consulting, and for anyone who knows anything about consulting interviews, very similar case study approach. Just to be able to articulate your problem-solving skills and help someone learn about you by vocalizing and verbalizing your thought process. And asking questions and engaging them would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I typically excuse myself to go to the restroom and get on my phone and Google it, and then I come back. And you probably should listen to these guys, but I would do that because I would be displaying and demonstrating my problem-solving skills. And I'd be like, I know exactly how to do this. Actually, I made this chart. You want to pull it up on this email I just made that I pulled off of Google Images. So that works.
Yes.
I'm looking to shift gears a little bit from going from art history into product management and joining a product management team. I think I have a certain specific competitive skill set. I also know that product management is not a concrete, defined role. How do I know when I'm ready to start applying, and what can I do to be a better candidate?
Well, I would say her question was about applying for making a transition into product management, which is an awfully fluid definition about what a product manager is and how to decide when you're ready to make that transition. From my own experience, which is probably the best way I can answer this question, is that I'm realizing I'm a very analytical person, by the way, in the course of this panel discussion. Looking at the things that you want to do as a product manager, what is attracting you to that field, the skills and practical applications that you want to be engaged with on a regular basis, identify what those are on a more smaller compartmentalized basis and figure out which ones you're already doing in your current job. Find potentially new jobs that maybe not even are labeled as product manager, but give you the opportunity to take on those skills and slowly make your transition into that role. I've never been a light switch person, right? I've never just decided to take a 180. I like to, and this is for me, obviously other people are different, but I feel comfortable when I have confidence. And so I've always stayed in a role where there are certain skills that I have strong background and experience in that I can rely on and stand strongly upon, while knowing that there are other things in that job that I don't have the experience, and that's where my focus is on learning. And through that experience, I develop those skills, and then I can transition somewhere else where there's potentially more skills and challenges that I want to tackle.
Do you know any product management software?
Do you mean like SQL, Google Analytics?
No, like Jira or like anything like that?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I would probably lead with that, like how, you know what I'm saying? That's, yeah, your technical skills there to manage products. I think that's probably one of the best things to put forth. And if you know those, then you're ready in a way, already ready in a way. But in the art history component, I'm curious why you're saying that, like, gives you a certain skill set. What specifically jumps out, like, that you're like, and then product manager from art history. I think, yeah, finding the intersection there, which there's plenty of tech that deals within that space. I mean, tons of it. God, I could tell you a company after this, by the way. Yeah.
The only other thing I would add is, you said it yourself, especially product management. It's kind of different at every company what a product manager does. Figure out what kind of product manager you really want to be, or maybe in your words, like where you have the strongest skills if you're just getting started, and ask, and look for those kinds of roles, and don't be afraid to ask the person on the other end who said, sure, yeah, let's interview you. Before I come in, and this goes for really anyone looking for any role. I joined Meetup a year and a half ago, and the first time I met with the CEO, Scott, and had a coffee, I was like, hey, if you're looking for a lead engineer who's going to be the best engineer, that's not me. If you're looking for a leader who's strategic, that's me. Which one are you looking for? And he said the one that was me, right? But I had 10 meetings before that where they were really just looking for the best engineer at their company, right? And I had to let them know, that's not the role for me. That's not what I'm looking for. Like, I'll help you find someone. So, maybe similarly in product management, like, look for a role that you think is a little bit more of a fit for you than the others.
Go ahead.
Well, you're going to need to buy some new clothes probably. But no. Well, yes, but that's not the answer you're looking for. I think a little bit similar to my last answer, I leveraged the clients that I had had and the types of projects that I had worked on, and I capitalized on those. I advertised them. I went after, interviews and companies that were in the same space, that used the same technologies. Even if I didn't know anything about them, I knew enough to talk about it during the interview. Take everything that you have in your toolkit and use it to your advantage. I use the toolkit analogy a lot when I'm talking to potential candidates or people who I mentor. You have these tools. Figure out if the company needs them. Find companies who need those tools, and don't be afraid to tell people that you have them. Someone may be looking for someone with a certain set of skills and qualities, but they don't realize that what they're actually missing is something that you have. So you just have to be sure to tell them about it and make a transition that capitalizes and leverages what you have to offer.
Anyone else? Yes.
The question was about not having a technical background and being able to easily communicate and translate technical requirements and language between engineers and clients or non-engineers. It is a challenge all the time, not just for me, but from all of my peers who I know find themselves in similar situations. It's a problem in every organization. I actually sometimes use the word translator to talk about the role that I serve between engineers and leadership at the company and the CEO, right? I counsel younger engineers to use me to your advantage as a translator. Let's work through this, right? Let me help you figure out the right way to articulate something. And I'm gonna ask you questions, and I'm sure you could ask a number of engineers that I work with. They would describe me as very annoying because I'm not afraid to ask questions over and over and say, but that still doesn't make sense to me. And do you know what I have found without fail? That while it may be annoying, at the end of that conversation, when we have finally landed at a place of understanding, we have both equally learned something out of that exchange. And so while it may be annoying, I think it's pretty valuable, and it's a good exercise for everyone's development.
How many tech blogs do you read? Tech blogs do you read? No, that's not a tech blog. Actual blogs written by engineers that you have to work with every day. You should start reading them, right? So if you want to understand engineers, you used a word, I have to deal with them, which sounds pretty toxic already, right? So if you already view it that way, and your engineers are probably never going to be as great writers as the bloggers that you read, but even just reading, I read on the subway back and forth. I probably get an hour of reading in to stay current on some things, but I think if you read an hour of really great tech writers writing about technical topics, you'd probably know enough to know and understand, like she said, those questions to ask and start to understand things better, and you'd be able to be a better translator of turning that into understandable words that business people can understand.
Can you recommend some?
Honestly, it kind of doesn't matter. Honestly, it doesn't matter what you're reading if you're just reading it to learn stuff. I don't have recommendations. I just scour, I have Pocket, and there's always 200 things for me to read on there. But if you email me, I could probably put together some sites I visited recently. I'm really bad at remembering names.
You in the back.
Well, I can answer something a little different. I'll let these ladies take the rest. But my friends that ask to join the tech sector, they're like, wait, so how do I get into doing what you're doing? I'm like, I will. In previous companies, I was like, do you want to join our QA team? Because that got their foot in the door, and everyone needed, again, it's one of those jobs that's not as glamorous, but man, you're like the rock stars, for me, from my perspective. So it was such a shoe in, because really your job was to break everything. And then you started to learn why you were breaking everything. And then you were then let's say you're reporting tickets back to the engineers that you want to start working with eventually, and then you're building those relationships, but they kind of secretly hate you for a little bit because you're breaking their stuff. But then you get a good rapport where like they're also not shipping things to clients that are buggy, right? So you're getting a shoe in at a section of the tech business that is underappreciated a bit, but definitely has a little bit more space for people that, hey, I have tech experience. I went to Flatiron. I know how this stuff works. Like, I want to come in and break it for you. Or I did break your product. I'm going to write you and say, I want a job because I want to help you fix it. And I want to go back and forth and work with your engineers, start learning why, what about their architecture, their infrastructure. You'll start to learn how to work within and that particular stack because you've been the one breaking it, and on all of the various form factors and operating systems. Like, you've cleared the decks, like you've gone everywhere, and then you can ask for your engineering job.
I just have to say, guess what my first job was out of college? QA engineer. Yeah. I'm so old that my first job was testing Ernst & Young's payroll and HR system to make sure that it didn't break in the year 2K, right? Y2K testing. So when it turned 2000, everyone would get paid at Ernst & Young, and they totally did. Yeah. But I think that's great advice, no one, so not only QA has turned much more into, and you'll see software engineer and test roles out there, QA engineer. I actually wrote code when I was back then as a QA engineer. And you really learn systems in and out. And it's less competitive in a lot of ways to enter that way. And at most organizations now, you'll be writing code just like an engineer. So you shouldn't view it as a step down in any way. So I think that's totally some great advice. Other advice that I think I already mentioned, but I feel pretty strongly about is, join open source communities and start contributing as much as you can, or join projects that other people are working on. The more you have to show, right? The more you have to show of something that's actually launched in a production system. So if you join open source communities and you've been a contributor to X project, guess what? That project is used by X number of companies in production. That's some great experience, and that's a different kind of experience than what you'd get at university or a coding school and that sort of thing.
I would say the advice that these two ladies shared about starting QA and moving over applies to non-technical roles as well. I've worked at companies where I've seen someone join as an accounting intern, then join full-time to become a bookkeeper, move into operations, became a project manager, and ultimately a product manager. And, in a relatively short time span. It's not something that I'd recommend you do with a very early stage company. This is better to do when you, are thoughtful about the company and you're identifying a company that's probably more of a mid-stage company, has good org infrastructure and management in place to help develop talent, and they're at a maturity level where they can recognize the reward to investing in their own employees versus spending money to recruit new. I think you'd have a lot of success.
Other questions? Yes, sorry.
Always darkest before the dawn, right? Honestly, I say that to myself at least once a week about something. I'm not kidding, guys. It's you always learn the most from your failures, and the faster you can fail and the quicker you can learn, the more often you can fail and the faster that happens, the more you can learn and the better off you'll be. So embrace them and learn a lot, and surround yourself with people who believe in blameless cultures and not about finger pointing, but more about, wow, we learned an awesome thing. Let's make us better, and move on, and know that if you're doing it right, shit's going wrong a lot, and you're learning really fast from it.
it's not a mantra, but I'm a really practical person, probably too practical sometimes. When I find myself in a tough position, I think I remember that I've never really been stuck somewhere before. If I had ever been stuck in an impossible situation, I'd still be there. I wouldn't have moved on to the place where I am now. So the fact that I've been able to get through whatever positions I was in before means I can get through this one. I just need to not lose my wits. And just knowing that I've been able to get through everything that got me to that point, whether it's unlocking a difficult door or, shipping a product, behind schedule, whatever that is, I've made it here. So it's just about figuring out what the right approach is to solving this problem.
So I think that's all we have time for. If you guys have any other questions, I'm sure you can email Yvette at Meetup. She will probably respond to you. Sorry. If you're a woman or a minority, sorry. I'd like to thank you guys for showing up, and thank you. It's been a great audience.
Hi guys, that's it. Thank you again so much for coming. It was really great to have you here again. If you want to learn more about Women Take Tech, visit womentaketech.com and grab a Flatiron School flyer on your way out. Have a great night, everyone.